Holy Gender Studies, Batman. The Cucktastic Four is about to deliver the death blow to Marvel that only Thanos could dream about. The cascading failure that is Disney's defining characteristic right now is the new Iger legacy, or at least the Iger Company legacy, because it's nothing but flops and failures going forward. The only exception being Lilo and Stitch and possibly the Lightstorm cooperative of Avatar. The company is now set to destroy the last viable IP that they have control of in the boys brand section. Well, it's not really a boys brand anymore. They've turned everything into a girls brand, and even the girls are turned off by Marvel. Worse yet, this effort at destruction has had earth-shattering consequences and effectiveness. And of course, if you think that I am ranting on with hyperbole, I assure you, I'm not. In fact, suit up, because I'm going to introduce you to the article where everybody is sourcing theirs. The patient zero when it comes to interviews that are set to take down Fantastic Four First Steps, which in this case should just be called the Sue Storm movie. Get ready, because we are about to expose and explode the modern audience approach of Feige's Final Doom. Well, at least we can only hope. Here we go. And before we get started, do remember to subscribe to the channel if you're not already, or just double check that you are. It's absolutely free, and it's going to help me get to 50K this summer and 100K by Christmas. And I can only do that with your help, so I'm going to thank you in advance. Also, while you're down there, hit the thumbs up button and share this video around, because I want people to know the originating source of all of this garbage. And with that being said, Entertainment Weekly, let's take a look. And as you can see here, this is where the story came from. Everything that The Wrap and Variety and Deadline and many of your favorite YouTubers are already reporting. This is where the disaster is centered, and you can now more understand why Pedro Pascal was the last-ditch effort to cast a Reed Richards, because no male in their right mind would want to be tied to this unless they were an effervescent male feminist, which, again, the cinema industry could do without these days. Welcome to the future, the retro future, that is, inside the Fantastic Four's First Steps. Look, this is going to be cucktastic, because all three of these male leads are worthless without Sue Storm, a pregnant Sue Storm for that matter. And anytime that you see Pedro Pascal tied to anything, you probably realize this is not for me. This is not for males, and this is not for the fandom, because he is the last thing you want to see when it comes to masculinity, because he has none. In fact, the writer-director on this one, Matt Shackman, is going to deliver nothing but the message, and you would have thought Disney would have learned by now, and I don't care about the fact that people are claiming there are reshoots. In fact, I believe the people who are saying there are reshoots. I just don't think they have the time or the interest in correcting all of these terrible mistakes, especially when the narrative is coming out that it's Sue Storm all along, and eventually her offspring, which will probably be the female baby Valeria, who I have no interest in. Oh, by the way, despite going back in the past to give you the Marvel's first family, this film is giving you a modern audience version of, well, that period of time. And a lot of claims made by Matt Shackman just show you how uneducated he is about space, the space program, and who actually made it to space first. But that's an aside, and you can suss that out for your own. And here it is, the terrible trailer about the terrible future that we're all going to be subjected to, with a terrible Reed Richards, a super empowered feminist of Sue Storm, played by Miss Kirby, who is probably the most damaging part of this entire endeavor. What's interesting is there's quite a bit of background coming out of this article from Entertainment Weekly. As you can see, they just glow with excitement over the changes and the possibilities of a new Fantastic Four, rewriting history, comic book history, and the stories that we all knew and loved. As you can see here, they go on and break down the characters for the uninformed, the uninitiated, and the people who just didn't care about comics. And they go into the history where Kirby and Stan Lee took Fantastic Four and made it number one in the comic sales at the time. They also go into the history of the characters themselves and how they came to be known as the Fantastic Four. And look, this is certainly going to help the people who, again, as I mentioned before, are uninitiated or unexperienced with this particular comic series, but at probably the cost of some authenticity, because all they want to do is rewrite this story in a modern audience style, destroying the actual history that's tied to these famous comic characters. So, to start, where this particular story seems to kick off for Entertainment Weekly is this paragraph. So, the new film will be set in the 1960s, just not our 1960s. First Steps is the 37th installment of the MCU, but it won't be set on the same Earth as Iron Man or the Avengers. Instead, the film begins on a parallel world in the Marvel Universe where history is unfolded completely differently. In our timeline, the 50s and 60s were full of artists and thinkers who imagined utopian futures full of miracle inventions like flying cars and robot friends. In this world, Reed Richards exists to invent them, and seemingly does. Walking through the extensive sets at Pinewood, that's Pinewood Studios in the UK, with the film's costume designer, production designer, producers, and director, one world comes up repeatedly: retrofuturism. Yeah, going back and retelling a tale that we already know in our world, trying to put a new intersectional spin on it, which is the part that they always leave out. Sure, retrofuturism used to mean something different, but we now have to translate it into Disney intersectional language so that we understand what their true intentions are. So, of course, they took advantage of the opportunity to write a different Earth with all of this modern garbage that audiences have been rejecting for quite some time, which means this film will have the interest of very few people, giving us a world without Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin going to the moon. It's going to be Reed, Sue, Johnny, and Ben, who were really the first to go into outer space. And, well, I guess that throws the Russians out the window as well. Again, not that I mind that part of the story, because that was always sort of assumed in the original comic creation. However, we still had to come to grips with the idea that was a comic universe and not a separate Earth, which is another problem that Marvel has created for itself, and trying to separate all of this with the multiverse, which again doesn't help them any and is just lazy storytelling. Moving forward in the article, casting was the number one challenge for the film, said Shackman. It wasn't just a search for who was going to be the best Ben and who was the best Johnny, but also who was the best family, which means, of course, they did a lot of retrofitting themselves. Who was the best married couple? Who were the best siblings and honorary uncle? So it's been very gratifying to see the incredible chemistry that the four of them have had since the beginning. Well, sure, they all wanted the job and needed the money, and Pedro Pascal will do anything to feminize male characters. As we all know, Johnny is Marvel's archetype of a hothead teenager. But what exactly that means has been open to interpretation over the years. Well, not so much for classic comic fans and people who like the nice long runs of over 100 different books back in the day. But in 2005 and 2007 Fantastic Four movies, for instance, Chris Evans played the character as a skirt-chasing scallywag, which is true to the character itself. Quinn says he wanted to do something different. He's a man that leads with a lot of bravado, which can be an affront sometimes, but also he's funny. Myself and Marvel Studios boss Kevin Feige, we're speaking about previous iterations of him, and we're where we are culturally. There it is. Modern audience, and of course the preferred culture of Hollywood, not the actual world we live in, or the one that works anyway. He was branded as this womanizing devil-may-care guy. But is that sexy these days? Yes, there's a certain amount of masculinity in some of the things that are a little bit of a skirt-chasing scallywag. In fact, those seems to still be the gentleman that the ladies chase, the bad boy. It's the one that they prefer. So, of course, you're doing everything you can to get away from the stereotype that works. At least that's what they insinuate. Continuing on, Quinn says, I don't think so. Yes, I don't think you are very masculine. This version of Johnny is less callous with other people's feelings. Oh, feelings. And hopefully there's a self-awareness about what's driving the attention-seeking behavior. Um, Probably not. And that's okay. Characters can be shallow and enjoyable, and they always have been until you guys got your grubby paws on it. Johnny is the little brother of the Fantastic Four, Quinn notes, but that's not the only quality that defines him. Well, that's true. He's had many moments where he's been the hero in the Fantastic Four. I can almost assure you that in this version, well, it's still not going to be as great a contribution as Sue, because I have a feeling it's going to be the Sue show all along. He's really smart, says Shackman. Okay. He's on that spaceship for a reason, and I think sometimes people forget that in various comic stories, he's been one of the most heroic of them, even if he's undercutting his heroism at every turn through humor. He's Sue's brother, which means they are cut from a similar cloth, and or they just understand the functionality of a family and the family structure. It's just that Sue and Reed, for that matter, are big examples for Johnny to live up to. That's the whole dynamic now, isn't it? There's only one paragraph to describe Reed, and it isn't much. His ability to stretch his body came from the radiation, but his brain is even more impressive, which he possessed before going to space. The whole retrofuturism aesthetic of First Steps is made possible by his inventions, and Shackman describes him as a combination of Steve Jobs, Albert Einstein, and Robert Moses. And that's it for the description to read, at least so far. Sue is just as accomplished in the political realm. As head of the Future Foundation, a concept taken from writer Jonathan Hickman's 21st Century Fantastic Four comics, one of the successor stories that is as beloved by fans as Lee and Kirby's originals. I don't know if that's true. She has helped achieve global demilitarization and peace. Now we know we're in a commie utopia, don't we? When Shackman and his collaborators say the dreams of the 60s have been made real in this movie, because that's the only place you can make socialism and communism work, they don't just mean rocket ships. The old and the new. Well, here's where we get into it, don't we? Achieving global political peace sounds only slightly harder than synthesizing the decades-long fictional history of Sue Storm. As Marvel's first female superhero, she's been a part of the Fantastic Four since the first issue. But back then, she carried the relatively demeaning codename of the Invisible Girl. The Invisible Girl is demeaning? I thought it just described what she was capable of doing. And of course, her powers evolved, as you'll find out here later in the article. But that's a pretty ridiculous stretch, and, well, that's what the super crazy commies have got to say about it. And of course, they have to try to make that a demeaning title, despite the fact that it's descriptive, because she has to be a victim. And boy, are we going to be covered in victimhood in this film. If you played an exact 60s Sue today, everyone would think she was a bit of a doormat, says the actress herself, Vanessa Kirby. I just want to say, I think this film is doomed. How about you? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. So, figuring out how to capture the essence of what she represented to each generation, where the gender politics were different, and embody that today, was one of the greatest joys of this. Well, I'm sure it was. Bringing the fantasy to life that, well, you'll never be able to achieve in real life, because nobody likes that and nobody lives that. And that is not a reality anybody is going to get behind. But hey, keep dreaming. Kirby continues. Matt and I were really aware that there hasn't really been a mother with a baby in these superhero archetypes women have been getting, Kirby says. One of the things I love most from Sue's history is when she becomes Malice. Well, of course. And all her dark stuff comes out. Yes, it did. I was obsessed with that chapter of her life, so I wanted to make sure that there were tones of Malice in there with her. That she wasn't just a stereotype of a goody, sweet mother. 50 Shades of Sue Storm, anybody? And of course, Kirby continues with her 5th or 6th paragraph in this article so far. I've always been really interested in the mess of femininity. The mess of femininity. Whew. And how can you be both? How can you be all the things? Not just the tough, invisible, powerful woman, but also a mother who gives birth, which is itself a superhero act. Okay, thought it was part of biology. I love that these characters are real humans in a messy family who argue and try to work it out and get things wrong. Well, you've got plenty wrong in this particular article, Miss Kirby. And although Marvel is reluctant to confirm the identity of Sue's first step's child, the comics canon provides two possibilities. And I think I've mentioned you have Franklin and Valeria. I think they're going to pick the girl. They always pick the girl. And of course, in this film, the big bad they're introducing is Galactus, who has a fascination with Franklin, but I think he can be manipulated, just like Disney does all the time, into being more interested in Valeria, which, again, that seems to be Disney's sole focus. Regardless of all the efforts that were taken to make this film, one effort that I think they've done that is going to backfire is the widespread news of this article and all that it conveys. I have a feeling that regardless of the aesthetics or all the efforts of making this film, I imagine one of the largest impressions that it will make is right here in this article, stoking the fears and, of course, confirming them that this is going to be politically and gender politics driven, which we've been warning you about for the last year and a half. I'm getting tired of saying, I told you so, but I told you so. And so did Chris Gore, and Nerdrotic, and Yellow Flash, and That Park Place, and WDW Pro, and Midnight's Edge, and I could go on, because even Brett Dasovic was talking about this earlier in the day. This film, in my estimation, is set up to be a disaster, following on the boot heels of another film that is looking like it's a disaster as well, in The Thunderbolts, which is following on a disaster known as Snow White. Do you get the theme here? Disney Disaster Club? Yeah, that's where we're at. The only exception this year is going to be Lilo and Stitch. Everything else going forward, up until we get to Avatar, complete mess. Maybe Zootopia 2 is interesting, but I don't think I want to go to family therapy in an animated kids film. And I don't think kids are going to enjoy that either. At the end of the day, it doesn't even matter what I think or what I've conveyed to all of you today. What matters is, what do you think? So let me know your thoughts down in the comments section below. Do you think that this film is going to have widespread appeal? Do you think that it's foolish for Disney to dive back into identity politics and focus primarily on intersectionalism and feminism and all the other isms that have not helped them out very much throughout the years? And finally, how many more of these failures do you think we'll have to sit through before Disney is forced to change? Because it seems like they're perfectly happy failing and flopping to the tunes of hundreds of millions of dollars on each of these films. And when are the investors going to wake up? I have to know. Anyway, with all that being said, be sure to take care of yourself, take care of others, and until next time, see ya! Real.